Good evening. I'm very happy to introduce this new dialogue on our museum series dedicated to French art and culture. Each month, we propose a discussion with a curator from a major institution to discover the rich collections of his or her museum, focusing on some very specific works of art. Today, we are happy to rediscover masterpieces of the recently reopened Mellon collection at the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts with Sylvain Cordier, the Paul Mellon curator and head of the Department of European Art. I am really honored to introduce our new moderator of the museum series, Faya Kose. She is a scholar and educator whose interests range in era from the Paleolithic to the present. Starting her professional career as a professor of art history at California State University in Long Beach, she recently retired at the head of the academic programs at the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. At the gallery, she oversaw the internship and fellowship programs, as well as developed the weekly public programs, including lectures, symposiums, and seminars presented by artists, historians, conservators, collectors, and curators, often serving as a moderator. Faya's advanced degrees are from the University of California, although her primary field is ancient art with a focus on archaeology and ancient art of Italy. She has also published and lectured on the history of museums, on the German modernist Sigmar Polk, on Michelangelo, and on Paul Cézanne. Her book on amber, notably Amber and the Ancient World, published by the Getty Museum, quickly became foundational resources in the field. Most recently, she contributed essays for the 2020 exhibit catalog, Cézanne, The Rock, and Quarry Paintings. Faya serves on numerous local and national boards, among them DC's own Hillwood Estate Museum and Gardens and the Archaeological Institute of America. In 2019, Faya was elected as a member of La Société Paul Cézanne and also a fellow of one of the oldest educational charities in the world, the Society of Antiquaries of London. Faya, Sylvain, thanks very much for being with us today for this promising discussion. I leave you the floor.
Oh, Faya, sorry, you're muted.
There we go. All right, so you've had a rehearsal of my lips moving. We will, here we go. How about that? Thank you very much, Denis, for your kind welcome. Now it is my turn to introduce to the audience this latest program in the #Museum series. This evening, we will travel to Richmond, to the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts, and talk with one of the museum's curators, as you heard, Sylvain Cordier. His focus will be the newly reopened, refurbished, and reorganized galleries that house the museum's Mellon collection. The paintings, sculpture, decorative arts, and jewelry donated to the museum by Paul Mellon and by his wife, Rachel Lambert Mellon, often known as Bunny Mellon. Masterpieces of French art highlight the collection, as you will see. Many of you in the audience are already familiar with the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts, with its world-class art collection and dynamic programming for all ages, on site and throughout the state. But for those of you who are not yet familiar with it or don't know it, let me tell you, this jewel of a museum welcomes you every day of the year, and admission is always free. The museum also provides wonderful online programs, talks on its global fine arts collections or music, and also offers at-home experience for all ages. Director and CEO Alex Nurjas and Chief Curator and Deputy Director for Art and Education Michael Taylor have led the way for the VMFA becoming one of the nation's top 10 comprehensive art museums. And the special exhibition programs are always another reason to visit. For example, already a week ago was opened Man Ray, the Paris Years, I highly suggest you go because it will transport you back to the French capital between the two world wars. It's on view until February 21st, 2022. And now to Sylvain Cordier. Just 2 years ago, practically to the day, November 1st, Sylvain joined the museum as Paul Mellon curator and head of the Department of European Art. He came to the VMFA from the Montreal Museum of Fine Arts, where he served as the curator of early decorative arts and the Napoleonic collection for 6 years. Sylvain was born and raised in France and received his doctorate in art history from the Université of Paris-Sorbonne in 2009. He taught there and held positions in 3 French museums prior to moving to Montreal. But his North American experience didn't begin in Virginia. He was selected for 2 of the most prestigious postdoctoral fellowships in the museum field in the United States. The first at the Metropolitan Museum of Art and the second at the Getty Research Institute. For the program today, we've asked Sylvain a couple of questions and to organize his presentation. He'll begin with a general presentation of the museum and some of the French collection. Thank you, Sylvain.
Thank you very much, Faya, for this kind introduction. And I will immediately share my screen. I hope you can see everything. Is it okay?
Wonderful.
Good, good. So yes, indeed, thank you very much, Faya, for this introduction. And the general introduction on VMFA. Of course, we're very happy that this is an opportunity again to invite everyone to come and visit us in Richmond and enjoy the amazing collections that we have here at the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts. We are one of the largest encyclopedic museums in the US. People tend to not know that fact, but we're pretty spectacular institutions in terms of the quality and the quantity of artworks that we possess. The museum was opened in 1936. We also have the kind of specificity of being a state museum, a state agency, an agency of the Commonwealth of Virginia, with a kind of right balance, I guess, between state funding and, of course, fundings from the private sector. We do have approximately, close to 50,000 artworks in our collection. Among them, 15,000 are European artworks that I have the honor of being the curator of. And I think we are also, we work very much into being among the leaders on the national scheme in terms of implementing a strategic plan that aims at promoting and developing, of course, concepts of equity, diversity, inclusiveness, and accessibility of our collection and its interpretation to as many members of the public as possible. And of course, so today it's my great pleasure to take this opportunity to tell you more particularly, more specifically about the newly reopened Mellon galleries. The most, I guess, revered part of the collection was clear when I interviewed for the position and was recruited as a Paul Mellon curator, that I was clearly told that the Mellon collections were the part of the collection that, of the European collection, that the public was most attached to. And we're here to celebrate, of course, the legacy of Paul and Bunny Mellon, the quality, the scope of their collecting, mostly specifically of French and English fine arts. As you know, Paul and Bunny Rachel Mellon, who was mostly known under the nickname Bunny, as you said, have had quite an amazing life and career, I would say, as collectors of art, as philanthropists, as garden designer, as far as she was concerned. And they ended up being some of the most important donors and benefactors, philanthropic benefactors of the history of American museums. Of course, we associate today the name of their collection with the National Gallery, which was the National Gallery in DC being part of, and their gift and his involvement also with his sister Elsa Mellon Bruce being extremely, I mean, more than influential, absolutely at the center of the very logic of the National Gallery coming to fruition. He also very, very much played an extremely important role in for Yale by creating the Paul Mellon Center for British Art and gifting it. It's like the largest part of his collection of British art, and of course VMFA is the third sister institution within that sort of family of museums to have benefited from their generosity. The different Mellon gifts that happened to VMFA sort of started at the beginning of the 1980s. In the late 70s, Paul Mellon retired from the Board of Trustees, where he served for about 45 years. So almost up to the beginning of the creation of VMFA until the early 80s. He was absolutely an influential member, president at some point of our Board of Trustees. And when he retired, then the institution and the Mellon family started negotiation about integrating part of his collection into the collection. That didn't end up actually, but that kind of one of the first consequences of that was the inauguration in 1985 of what we call the West Wing of the museum, in association with another very important family, the Lewis family, the creation of a wing to receive the Mellon collection. That was inaugurated in 1985. And then there was an ongoing series of enrichment of that donation that lasted until he passed away in 1999. And then that continued until she eventually passed away, Mrs. Mellon, in 2014. And it's very, I always, of course, mention the sisters institutions, the National Gallery, Yale, and VMFA, and VMFA being part of that kind of generous and extremely generous and very sort of complementary, very logical spirit of collecting and gifting that Paul Mellon was that was very clear in Paul Mellon's mind. And their influence, their involvement with VMFA being very much motivated by the deep affection that they had for the state of Virginia, where they lived. They lived near Middleburg in that wonderful estate of Oak Springs, and they wanted, I guess, to make their attachment to Virginia very clear by selecting VMFA and sponsoring and supporting VMFA over the years. The Mellon Galleries started, as I was saying, in 1985 with the most officially, I think, started with the inauguration of the West Wing in 1985. And it turned out that in the mid-2015, there was a need, a kind of very material need for restoring that building. And I think mostly there was a huge issue with the flooring of that West Wing that I was evoking earlier, and that the necessity to readdress, from a very physical perspective, the building kind of started the idea that it was time probably to kind of rethink the display of the collection. It was an opportunity to kind of re-envision the way the collection would be displayed and interpreted. And we were like I think in 2017, 2018. And at the same time came the the start of a search for a new Paul Mellon curator. And that's kind of how I came into the picture. And I arrived at the museum in 2019 with clearly the aim, the most pressing project being to rethink that narrative and that display of the Mellon collection. We were supposed to reopened those galleries in October 2020. And of course, as you know, COVID hit in 2020. And so we decided to postpone that reopening to a year later. And so in October of this year of 2021 was eventually the reopening of these new Mellon galleries. I have to say, I felt quite Indian. I mean, looking backward at the situation, I'm very happy that we got that complementary year, in a sense, to kind of do things that take more time to think about how we could do things better. The nature of the Mellon collection is diverse. It's, as far as we're concerned, and this is mostly what I'm going to speak about tonight, it's extremely rich, an extremely rich ensemble of wonderful French art, running from Barbizon, so running from the pre-impressionist movement up to modernism, up to the first years after World War II, so from the 1860s up to the 1950s. And that sort of French aspect of the Mellon collection being very much associated to Bonnie Mellon's Francophilia. She was much more interested in France than Paul Mellon himself, but she managed to convince him of the interest of French art, specifically French art at the turn of the 19th and the 20th century. And that collection, even though it kind of represents, evokes more Bonnie Mellon probably to us, was definitely something that they would do together as a couple. And it's really something that I like to think about, that within that collection of what we call Mellon French, or Mellon Impressionism, even if it's much broader than just Impressionism, it's really something that the couple was doing as really a couple of collectors. And then a second part of the Mellon collection that we show here is the sporting art. So mostly 18th century to 19th century, or even to the first half of 20th century, but with a specific focus on 18th and 19th century, horse-related, sports-related English art that was the absolute passion of Paul Mellon's, as himself a horse enthusiast, and as a very dear Anglophile. He was himself American and British through his mother, and had developed, from his early years, a fond interest for English culture, and especially English culture from the 18th and early 19th century. And so we have kind of that dual aspect of the collection, I think, as the main element to understand them as collectors and givers and benefactors of our institution. So, and it's my pleasure, I guess, now to take you through a few photos of the newly displayed galleries and tell you about kind of the narratives that we have implemented within those new galleries. So we'll start with, on the second floor, what we call Mellon French, so that kind of pre-impressionist to modernist galleries. We begin with a gallery dedicated to landscape painting in 19th century France, which I kind of thought about as an introduction to the different logics of Impressionism. Then we move to a gallery, the largest gallery of the setting, which is dedicated to Impressionism itself, with a collection of very important masters of Impressionism around Monet, Renoir, Basile, Caillebotte, Morisot, Manet, Tissot, etc. Then we have a gallery dedicated mostly to the work of Degas and his contemporaries, so also in the context of Impressionism, but which I wanted to focus on the concept of women models in Degas' France. Then we move on to the period of post-Impressionism around specifically Van Gogh's career in France, as well as the school of Pont-Aven around the figures of Gauguin and Paul Sérusier. This is also a gallery where we're showing our Cézanne and our Seurat. Then we moved to a gallery dedicated to the Fauve revolution, Fauvism, and kind of revolutionary turn of 1905 and the Salon d'Automne of 1905 with the Fauve revolution around Matisse, Van Dongen, Vlaminck, etc. Then, and then we moved to something which is, I think, is particularly I particularly appreciate, which is the very nice, interesting group of works by the Nabi, the artists from the Nabi group around Bonnard, Vuillard, and Vallotton, especially, which are artists that the Mellons particularly appreciated and collected, and that that sort of corpus of Nabi artists being particularly interesting to having proved very interesting for me personally to study. Then we move on to the final section of the this Mellon French with a section dedicated, a gallery dedicated to Cubism on one side, with especially this wonderful late Picasso from the 1950s, the Chinese chest of drawers, Braque, Lafresnaye, Villon, Borandi, and on the other side of the gallery, and I'm sorry, you can't see it on my photo, a section dedicated to Raoul Dufy and the mature years of Raoul Dufy. And then we're moving up on the third floor of the west wing of the museum, where we have a progression, a walkthrough dedicated to sporting art, to Paul Mellon's collection of sporting art, which is organized into three galleries. The first one being dedicated to portraits of horses running from the 18th century up to the mid-19th century, mostly English, but with some integration of French art. And when I say mostly English, with a particular focus on an artist that Paul Mellon was very fond of, and which is, of course, George Stubbs, which kind of is enthroned at the center of the gallery. Then we have a second gallery dedicated to the iconography and the art of hunting. Again, associating works from England in mostly early 19th century with French works, and it's kind of the interesting early 18th century, first half of the 18th century being particularly interesting in that regard, because we see within French art and sporting art in particular the clear effect of the Anglophilia of society, of aristocratic society at the time. So I've always felt it was very interesting to connect some works by Delacroix, some work by Géricault, by Dedreux, for instance, to which Paul Mellon collected, to his more officially British, I mean, more clearly British collection coming from Britain. And then we have a third section dedicated to the art, the sporting art associated with horse racing, racing horses, especially focusing on the art of early 20th century British artist Alfred Munnings, and also, and I will develop a bit more on that later, a section dedicated to the iconography of slavery, the images of slavery in American sporting art in the 19th century. We finish also the sporting art by the very original and quite spectacular collection, something that Paul Mellon particularly appreciated, which is his collection of Art Deco sculptures representing the British champion animals, a series of sculptures made by the famous Art Deco American, but working mostly in Europe, sculptor Herbert Hazeltine, which now kind of are placed at the introduction of that sporting art gallery. And then we finish the Mellon galleries by a wonderful by display of the wonderful collection that we inherited from Bonnie Mellon of her collection of jewelry that was designed for her, and in which actually she was a very important part of the creative process, designed for her by the kind of late surrealist designer Jean Schlumberger, who at the time, so we're talking about the 1960s and 70s, who at the time was the head of Tiffany and kind of working between France and New York. And so it was one of the exciting aspects. There were many very exciting aspects of redesigning and re-envisioning that presentation. But the redisplay of the Schlumberger collection was particularly interesting, I think. And so here is here was a quick survey, I think, of everything that we have here reopened recently for our public.
Sylvain, thank you so much. And I think that this makes us all want to get there as soon as possible. The beautiful layout, the colors about which the wall colors, which we will ask about, and this transition from the ground floor to the second floor. We look forward to that. One of the things in our discussion before the presentation tonight was to follow a model that of this museum series is to ask similar kinds of questions to curators. And one that we asked Sylvain to think about was, is there an iconic work or works in the collection, and what might they be?
Yes, of course. And in fact, thinking about particularly iconic work within the Mellon collection, it was very difficult to select one. So what I chose, and there could be other selection or other works that I could have chosen, but I've been particularly interested by our 3 Monet paintings, because and generally as a curator, I like the opportunities that we have in a museum when an important artist is not only represented by one artwork, but by the sort of chronology of artworks that help documenting, illustrating the evolution of their life, the evolution of the of their style and their career. And I have to say that we have that great opportunity with within the VMFA's Mellon collection to do that with 3. We actually have 4 Monet paintings, but 3 are particularly associated with Paul Mellon. And these are the 3 that I'm showing you here. It's very nice. So we start like chronologically with Camille at the Window and Argenteuil, which is a painting from 1873. And we are, when we look at this painting, we are at the kind of the early period when Impressionism kind of comes into into fruition, if I may say so. You know that the famous exhibition that they organized in 1874 kind of created the term Impressionism, that these artists who called themselves independents were kind of nicknamed the Impressionism in 1874 as a result of that exhibition. Everything that kind of leads to 1874 is interesting to bear in mind when we want to understand the movement of Impressionism. And here we have, with Camille at the Window, that moment within Monet's personal life and career where he finally sort of, after struggling a lot as an artist, finally manages to have a bit of financial and social security. The family, so him and his wife and their son, moved to Argenteuil, a bit further from Paris, into this house, which will be the house of happiness in these years. And we have this beautiful, really beautiful portrait. I mean, I say portrait, I shouldn't say portrait. It's not a portrait, it's a fantasy. It's a beautiful representation of his wife kind of framed into nature, framed into flowers, and also by the logic, the very protective logic of the house. And we know that she had a very poor health, unfortunately, and she was to pass away, unfortunately, a few years after. And then with the second Monet painting, then we move on 1 decade. Situation has evolved. Camille has passed away, and Monet decides to leave Argenteuil, to move further away from Paris, closer to his native Normandy, into Normandy in Giverny. And we have this really fascinating, fabulous representation of the house that he gets, settles in Giverny, with that rural surroundings that are going to become the most important source of his inspiration, nature around his house in Giverny. It's a painting that I always look at thinking about Virginia, about the land of Virginia, and especially the region of Middleburg where the Mellons used to live, with the Blue Ridge Mountain in the back. And I'm pretty sure that there was something very inspirational for them into this painting. And the third painting is, which actually is not a Mellon, was not a Mellon gift, but it's a painting that we acquired during the time that Paul Mellon was a president of our board of trustees. So it's a painting that he knew perfectly and wanted to see and approved to see its integration into the collection. And we're much later at the end of Monet's career, in the very famous context of the creation of Les Nymphéas, so that kind of large sort of patriotic project that Monet develops during World War I, of this huge decoration set collection of immense canvases representing his interpretation of the pond of his garden that eventually wanted to give to the French nation. And we know that out of the hundreds of paintings that he made in the context of World War I, having in mind that project of giving it to the nation, only a part of it was eventually gifted. And this is what we can now see at the Musée de l'Orangerie in Paris. But some of them remained in the collection of Monet, and then eventually the heirs sold them away, and some of them made their way to America. And this is the case for that absolutely spectacular painting that we're very happy to have in the collection. So I think, yeah, they would qualify to me, at least for today, as very iconic works from the collection.
Thank you, Sylvain. And also because of the subjects, it's very easy to see how Bunny Mellon, with her passion for gardens and her passion for flowers, that three different phases of Monet's life would be just the right thing. Mm-hmm. Well, we asked Sylvain another question, not only his professional opinion of the iconic works, but something more personal. Do you have a particular favorite or favorites? And we won't ask, how did you choose? But we will ask, do you have a favorite or favorites?
I do, of course. And I have several, actually. But one that I particularly wanted to talk about today is kind of an exception within the Mellon collection, because it's not a work that the Mellons collected, but it's a work that we acquired in memory and in homage of the Mellon in the context of the reinstallation of the Mellon collection. It's something that I've thought about very early on when arriving at the museum. And given the importance of Naby paintings, Bonnard, Vuillard, Vallotton in particular, but particularly Bonnard and Vuillard, in the Mellon collection, I felt very quickly that we were kind of missing an artwork that would explain the origins of the Naby movement, and the Naby movement being this fabulous, fascinating period of association between a group of young artists who wanted to revolution art at the very end of the last decade of the 19th century, digesting and reflecting on the influence of Paul Gauguin. And so I felt that if we were to make an acquisition, we would have to look into for a work that would be an early Naby painting. And I came across this extraordinary painting by Paul Sérussier, The Three-Pond Cottage at Le Pouldu, which is a work that I completely fell in love with and was very happy that we could acquire and integrate into the collection. Paul Sérussier is an extremely, I want to say, fabulous, adorable artist, late 19th and early 20th century artist, trained as a Parisian of origin, trained as an academic painter, very frustrated about the training that he receives at Académie Julian. And the story is quite well known, but he travels for the summer vacation with his family in Brittany, hears that, and it's in 1888, hears that Paul Gauguin, who everyone at the time is talking about, it's this kind of genius who works kind of exiled from the Paris society, is working in Brittany at the time and doing those wonderful kind of reinventing painting against academism, against impressionism, kind of infusing a new impetus into art, what we call the movement of synthesism. And Sérusier decides to, unexpectedly, it's the last day of his vacations in Brittany, decides to come to meet with Sérusier in the little town of Pont-Aven in the south of Brittany, and meets with them and learns from him, spends the day with him. And here, of course, I'm showing you examples of how Gauguin, but also Émile Bernard, who was installed with him in Pont-Aven, kind of reinvent modern paintings. And here we have examples of their reinvention of landscape painting. And Sérusier comes and for just a matter of one day, comes and learns from them, and mostly from Gauguin. And we know that he comes back and then has to take the train back to Paris. It's the end of his vacation, and comes back with this very teeny tiny painting called La Veine au Bois d'Amour, which is now belongs to the Musée d'Orsay, shows that painting. So that's the painting that I'm showing you to the right, shows that paintings to his fellow students at Académie Julian. And here you have Bonnard, Vuillard, Vallotton, Maurice Denis, etc. Everyone falls in love with this new ways of technique. Sérusier becomes kind of the leader of a new group because he has received the teaching of the genius that Gauguin was, and that started the movement to the creation of this group of the Nabi meaning prophets in Hebrew. They decide to call them the prophets of a new art. Well, what is particularly interesting is the fact that in the summer 1888, Sérusier painted the Lac au Bois d'Amour, the Forêt au Bois d'Amour, which was called the Talisman, nicknamed the Talisman. He decides to come back, of course, the following year, first in the summer and then come back in the fall, in October of 1889. And what we have here with the painting that we acquired is in fact one of the paintings that he completed into that kind of following session of teaching teaching by surrounded by Gauguin. And I feel like we had with this painting a very, very great example, a fabulous example actually, of the influence of the mentorship of Gauguin on an artist. And so a very kind of initial movement towards what the Nabi group would eventually become. And also a very interesting proof of the emulation between the young Sérusier and the more mature Paul Gauguin. And here I'm showing you, for instance, a painting by Gauguin, which in fact the Mellons belong to Mr. and Mrs. Mellon, but which they give to the National Gallery and not to the MFA. And this is also, and where it actually represents almost exactly the same place, this little village of Le Pouldu, which also kind of was for me a great opportunity to acquire this Sérusier, was to think about that painting by Gauguin that the Mellon eventually had and gifted to the National Gallery. We have, I think here it's one of my projects that has turned into a real passion for me, and I hope one day to be able to do an exhibition about Gauguin and Sérusier painting together in those years 1888, 1889 and 90, because there's so much very fascinating things to think about into the burgeoning of that synthesis movement and its eventual influence on the Nabi group. So here's, I think, I have to say my favorite painting is this one.
Wonderful too, and I think it would be a great adventure to see both of them. You can easily do that in a day by car or by train.
And a show one day.
Yes, exactly. And the show one day. And they are, they reproduce beautifully. Another question that we have asked the series, and this is the fifth one, is are there works? So we're looking at the past, but are there works which illuminate aspects of issues of the present, current topics? And you gave us a little bit in your introduction about what you're going to talk about, and it's with great interest that we see what you say.
Yeah, absolutely. There is something also that we thought about very early on in 2020 as a kind of ongoing result of our strategic plan for inclusiveness, which is something that we have implemented for already 7 years now, but that has kind of gotten a very crucial and strong importance since the Black Lives Matter, was to try as much as possible to reconcile the logic of our Mellon collection, of our European collection in general, with the representation of African American populations, and integration of some of the difficult aspects of iconography within European or American art of the 18th and early 19th century. And on that regard, within the Mellon collection, very early on, I came across this very interesting, very poignant, and really, really fascinating collection of paintings, so mostly of American art, and especially by a Swiss-born artist who worked mostly in America, Edward Troy, representations of sporting art, so of portraits of horses, that clearly document the role played by enslaved African Americans in the training and care of race horses belonging to wealthy households from wealthy families in the south of the US. It's a collection of paintings, and we're displaying 4 paintings by Troy in the sporting art collection. We kind of dedicated a whole section to that iconography, so images of slavery in American sporting art, kind of revolving around this corpus of artworks. And it became to me quite, obvious and completely essential to kind of really dedicate, to really think about the right interpretation of these works. They had been presented in the past in the previous presentations of the Mellon collection, but apparently not as thoroughly at what we decided to do here. And I'm saying that although a lot of research had been done by my predecessor, I have to say that I'm in rethinking their presentation, and really relied a lot on the quality of the research that was done, especially by Malcolm Cormack, who was a previous Paul Mellon curator. What is really fascinating with those paintings is the fact that, thanks to the research that have been done, we happen to know a lot about, quite a few things, I want to say, about the people represented. And of course, we look at these paintings in the 20th century in a very different way, obviously, than the commissioner and the painters, the artists, or the friends of the commissioner would have looked at the painting. From the logic of the 19th century, this is a portrait of a horse. These are portraits of very valuable, important horses that the masters of the household would favor and particularly like, and would have wanted represented. And they're surrounded by people who took care of them. And in the logic of the painter, we see clearly an import of the British tradition of the portraits of horses coming from the 18th century in England, where the horse is, the very valuable horse is represented, held by a groom who in the context of British art, of course, is a Caucasian servant. And the thing is that with the import of that iconographic tradition into America, we see that switch that clearly documents the fact that the care of the horses was almost completely the responsibility of enslaved African people. It is really fascinating, and of course I invite you, because I don't have a lot of time to develop too much on that, but it's really something that is fascinating, because we know things about the people represented, and nowadays we see that we're more interested into knowing about them than to commemorating who these horses were and what they won, etc., etc. So it's kind of an very interesting and moving switch in the interest that we had the opportunity to do. It also meant a very interesting exercise into retitling some of these works, of course, by considering that the people are definitely more important to memorize and to celebrate and to commemorate than the animals themselves. So we did all that exercise. It was a very poignant and very moving exercise, I have to say. And I'm finishing that section on, if I may say, in such a cruel situation, historical situation, sort of kind of notes of hope, that this is also within that section that I included one of the masterpieces of the Mellon collection of American art, which is the wonderful A Ride for Liberty by Eastman Johnson, which after that display of artworks illustrating the sad reality of enslavement, we have this painting that represents, in the context of the Battle of Manassas, so in really the context of the Civil War, Eastman Johnson memorizing and turning the anecdote of seeing a family escaping, kind of appropriating a horse to escape north and run away for freedom, and turn it into this wonderful work of American romanticism. So yeah, I think it was that exercise that we did.
Thank you, Sylvain. One of the things then that you point out is that of the various roles played, there are enslaved jockeys, trainers, and grooms,
yes.
and grooms, and that, as you said, and another thing, especially in horse country, is that the descriptions have changed. So words like readying or tending to are now more precise than they have been before. So I think
Absolutely.
that will...
and the order, like the former titles were really, the name of the horse tended, and I don't want to go into details there, because you can imagine all the kinds of ways people would have been described in earlier context that we of course could not accept anymore nowadays. But yeah, you point out very, very interestingly that we have different kinds of involvement, different kinds of professions around between the groom, the jockey, like the Ansel Williamson, Edward Brown, and the undefeated surrounding undefeated asteroid show us perfectly a young jockey, so who's the person fixing his boot. We know, so it's Edward Brown, and he's 14 years old when he's represented on that painting. And we know that he grew into becoming a trainer himself, and then after the Civil War, managing to become one of the most successful trainers of horses in Kentucky. It's a painting that was done in Kentucky. Again, come to the museum and you'll see.
We will come.
Yeah.
Well, Sylvain, this has been a marvelous introduction, a little bit of an immersion, and you have some questions. If I think I will just start with one of the questions. And not only you have questions, but you also have comments. And thanks for the way that you have presented us your reasons why. For the question and answer, one of them has to do with something that much struck me as well. We have, while most ask about the art on the wall, this person said, I'm fascinated and charmed by your selection of colors for the painted walls. And could you tell us more, just a little bit about that and how you came to it? And what was it, the team, or as you decided to do the rooms? So there we go. Just a few minutes to answer that.
Oh, very quickly, it's I am very committed to changing the traditional culture, and I'm really not the only one. I think it's a matter of generation. 20th century has focused a lot on the idea of what I used to call the gray cube. So that idea that the wall of the museum has to be as discreet as possible so that people can really focus on the works. And I'm really not criticizing that approach to art, because it had many logics, and it was very logical from many perspectives. I tend to belong to a generation of curators that believe that the experience of the artwork has a lot to do also with how you feel within a room and the level of welcoming and inclusivity that we develop. And I think the color, like picking colors that would go very well with as well as possible with the artworks themselves, but that would play a role into creating a sort of sense of drama, a sense helping creating a narrative also for the different galleries, play a great role into kind of renewing the interest that people may have in our collection. I deeply believe in that. And so always when I install a gallery, that the choice of color is always part of the reflection that I do in terms of how works will work together. So it's never, or very rarely, an anonymous color or like an ineffective color that I select.
Well, it was a wonderful thing. I mean, in addition to the paintings, is we went from room to room. It was really marvelous, and only one white room.
It's kind of an evocation. It's kind of a way to say that I want to remain very much respectful to the that post-World War, that 20th century gallery. I really wanted to be a sort of white cube.
One of the other questions concerns the exhibition that I mentioned at the beginning. Perhaps I didn't do a good job of who the photographer was. So we have a question. Could you please talk about that exhibition a little bit more, Man Ray in Paris? Just we know when it closes, and we know that it's open. So just a few more sentences about Man Ray.
Yeah, so absolutely. It's an exhibition that was curated by our chief curator, Dr. Michael Taylor. It's a wonderful show, and it's been a project that Michael has worked on for many years. So we're in the 20s and the 30s, when Man Ray moves, so American photographer moves to Paris, and start building his network of clients and kind of completely reinvents a way of conceiving photographic portraits of all the sort of cultural intelligentsia. It's a very interesting exhibition in the sense that you really learn and see and understand the cultural impact and importance of all the important artists, writers, and cultural figures that live in Paris in that period. Thinking Cocteau, of course, Gertrude Stein, all the surrealist people, and as well as the Duchess of Windsor, Wallis Simpson. There's a wonderful part on Man Ray realizing the portrait of Wallis Simpson. Right. So it's a more modern, of course, exhibition than the Mellon collection itself. Although we have a lot of art from the 1920s and 30s, but it's a great show, and the catalog is absolutely fabulous, really. So I would really, of course, come to see the Mellon collection, but please also pay a visit to Man Ray.
We have a couple of questions which are a little hard to answer in a few sentences. So I will tell you what probably we have time for two kinds of questions. One of them is, what about the Mellons? Did they have artistic advisors, favorite dealers, etc.? And so that's a number of questions about who advised them, how did they work with others, and I'm sure you will be able to say that this is something Paul Mellon writes about, and some very poignant stories in his book, With a Silver Spoon. But the other question in our time remaining is, do you have programs for children at the VMFA?
Oh, yes, we do.
So maybe,
that would be a bit difficult for me to give a precise.
But on the website, direction.
Definitely, yeah. Go and visit the website. We have a wonderful education team. We bring children, of course, in the museum. I was there yesterday, Sunday. We had a wonderful Baroque concert in our galleries, not in the Mellon collection, but in our Baroque galleries. And then I went back to the Mellon galleries, and so a group of children being told about Degas' Little Dancer, age 14. It was a wonderful scene to see. And also that's a good opportunity for me to mention the fact that on the 15th of January, we're going to have a concert in the Mellon Galleries, a concert of early 20th century music. I didn't think about about talking more precisely about that, but we are going to implement a program of concerts in the gallery, and I'm very, very excited about that. We started yesterday. And the next venue is going to be the Mellon collection. As far as the advisors and dealers, it would be a bit long to talk about that, but indeed, also a lot of research has to be made. That's an interesting aspect of the job, and I've only been there for 2 years, and a lot of it having been COVID. But I'm going to start researching a lot of archives, which so far haven't really been worked by scholars. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done. There's a definitive catalog that needs to be written about the provenance of the work, about precisely like the role of artistic advisors and the dealers, especially in the French collection. It's better known in as far as the British part of the collection is concerned, but there still is a lot of work to do on that regard. For the French art, I would say that the Wildenstein gallery played an important part in making that collection, but there were other artists. But that's a long project for me to kind of dive into the archives when the time comes.
Sylvain, just to say again, for other questions that might be asked, I want to say again how wonderful is the website for the VMFA, whether it is for categories, adults programs, or on-site or online programs. There is a section that talks very eloquently about the importance of the museum to the Commonwealth with statewide programs. So feeling for the children at VMFA, there is plenty on the website. Well, I think there we are. We're 1 hour, and we were asked to think about 1 hour. Okay. I think we've, it's been a wonderful experience learning more about this in preparation for the program, and want to thank you. And once again, for your director and CEO, Alex Nirgis, and for Dr. Michael Taylor, the chief curator and head of education. It's been wonderful, and thank you very much, Sylvain.
Thank you. Thank you very much.